Davos in Switzerland, where the World Economic Forum is being held. I'm Nick Gowing. We can all cherish and delight in the fabulous snow-capped mountains around us here in Davos, but as everywhere on the globe, they hide a growing horror story. The world is suddenly having to confront our abuse of nature. We've been doing it for a long time, but now the value and the sinister nature of it is becoming very apparent. It's a nature that we all take for granted, I should say, of course. All of us abuse nature, not just how we live, but also what we consume and how it is produced. Almost everything has a footprint in nature. We don't think about it, but that's the reality that we're facing, and we're abusing nature as a result. Nature must not be taken for granted any longer. Until now, nature has fortunately been a correcting mechanism. That can no longer be expected. Nature can't cope with any of this. No longer can nature be relied upon to compensate for our abuse of everything around us. The clock, therefore, is ticking, and it's ticking fast, faster than most are aware of and assume. So this debate, convened by the Mariam Foundation, the Forum Foundation for Improving Leadership, is about getting to you, whether you're watching us here in Davos or right around the world, an idea of whether progress is being made on nature, how much progress, or what needs to be done at what kind of speed. So that's the context. And what I'd like to do is, first of all, to Dr. Martin Stucki, welcome. You are an expert in this area, in nature. How much are we abusing nature, Martin?
Well, there's two ways to ask the question, how does nature do? And the question, how does our relationship to nature do? Let me take a slight step back. What is civilization overall? You can tell it as a story of human ingenuity, of how we collaborate, how we build. You can also tell it as a story of how that was then accelerating with the early days of the Enlightenment and then the beginning of industrialization, which created this world where we live, where every one of us is disposing of opportunities that even kings and emperors could only dream of 100 years ago. But there's a different way to tell the story. Whilst our produced and financial capital, our human capital, and to some extent our social capital has been increasing, during all that time, our nature capital has been declining. And now for the first time, we're at a point where the bank is empty and we start feeling—
It really is empty.
The bank is empty. We live in a world now where over the last 40 years, we have lost 70% of the population abundance, that's the way the biologists call it, of vertebrates, which is amphibia, reptilia, birds, mammalia, have actually disappeared. This is not just in Sumatra or in Congo. This is everywhere. I live in a country, I come from Germany, where we have lost 86% of the biomass of insects since I left school. If we ask ourselves, all the vertebrates on the planet, how much do they weigh and who is contributing what? Human beings, 33%, livestock, 64%, wild animals, 3%. What we are witnessing in front of our eyes is a quasi-complete marginalization of the natural world, to an extent that we start to break its neck. So far it has always been providing the resilience that we needed for the next harvest, for building infrastructure, for developing or for buffering also climate change. And what we're seeing now is ecosystems, both terrestrial and marine ecosystems, are exhausted and they don't provide the resilience and the buffer anymore. And now
really exhausted. They cannot replenish themselves.
What we are witnessing is that, for example, some of the large tropical forests in the tropical belt, like the Amazon, which was this ultimate carbon storage, the ultimate carbon sink, has now for the first time actually turned into a source of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. What we are seeing is that complete fish populations are breaking down. What we are seeing is that most of the coastal zone of the world are actually so-called dead zones. So for the first time, is in the past, sort of we could always rely that there is so much regenerative capacity in nature that it always sort of it was our best ally on our humanity journey. But now we have overdone it. And if you want to translate it into economic language, and this is how Partha Dasgupta would describe and
He's
frame the
the
problem.
emeritus professor of economics at Cambridge University who produced a serially important document for COP26.
Exactly, and which then inspired the major breakthrough that we should celebrate, which is COP15, which was the global biodiversity
a separate
framework in
process.
Montreal, which is the second big commitment that we have made as mankind, where we said we need to stop this, we need to reverse this, and we need to do this fast by 2030. And in the same way, we know that in climate, we don't want to raise beyond 1.5 degrees, which we have, if we are honest to ourselves. This is the first 1.5 degree Davos. In the same way, we also have a number that gives us guidance when it comes to biodiversity and nature, 30 by 30. We need to put nature, or the 30% of the planet, under some kind of protection status by 2030 in order to get us there. He would reframe the problem by saying, nature, and this is something that Eric has worked on a lot, is critical infrastructure. For the first time we feel it. It's infrastructure for our businesses, for our economies, and for society at large. It's the only infrastructure category which we are depreciating without reinvesting. That must change.
Crude question, how much does the public understand this when they go to a supermarket, go to a store, get stuff delivered in an online van? How much do they realize they're abusing nature because they go to a shop and assume that someone else has taken responsibility? How much do they now have to realize they have a responsibility for what they're purchasing, what they're using, what they're consuming?
And they do, because everything, 100% of the economy is 100% dependent on nature. And in my former, one of my former incarnations, I was a senior managing partner at McKinsey, and we wrote reports where we were talking about how nature is a risk and how many trillions, zillions of course, it's wrong to say that 20, 50, 60% of the economy is dependent on nature. All of our human civilization is depending on nature, and every purchase that we do actually is consuming extractively a part of it. And we need to, the only way out of that is actually to account for it, nature capital accounting. We need to know how much we have, and we need to start investing into the maintenance and into the expansion of nature capital in the way we would do it for any other infrastructure category, capital category as well.
Well, let me pick it up now with Eric Begloff, normally based in Beijing. Eric, because you're chief economist of the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. You're an economist. You happen to be based in Beijing at the moment. How much do you think in transformative economics this is now understood or not?
Well, first of all, I should say that we are a newcomer to this debate. We are eight years. We turned 8 2 days ago. But we are very much in listening and learning mode. And we described the issues that we are facing and the seriousness of these issues and the emergency that it implies. But there's also some exciting things going on. There's a lot of data being produced, very important data. You quoted some of it, and it's data that we can make use of as development banks or as investors in general. And that data, we just launched a report called Nature as Infrastructure. And we try to look at that data and see what we can learn. And there's so much, when you think about nature as infrastructure, as Martin so well put it, this is our most precious infrastructure, the one that sustains life on Earth. And of course, for a bank that calls itself the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, it opens up fantastic possibilities of what we could be doing. And when we think about nature's infrastructure, it is really, it's a very ambitious objective. It's really about going beyond, not do no harm, about going beyond nature positive. It's incorporating, building, of course, on nature-based solutions. But what it really implies, in my view, is that we should make use of the full potential of nature. So when we look at the services that we need to have, we are already there trying to put in place, real tools to translate the Dasgupta thinking and the thinking that Martin has been part of developing. You know, we do in the report, we take a kind of traditional, perhaps wetlands project is about basically trying to protect against flooding, but we take a new expanded version of cost-benefit analysis. It sounds very trivial, but it's actually very concrete. So we look at, you know, what does this wetland produce beyond this flood protection? Well, there's a lot of actual agricultural production tied to that. There's water purification. There is there's pollination, very important for agriculture. There's of course the recreational values and so on and so on. So these tools are there now. We can apply them as you know, companies, as development institutions. It's there. I spoke about the data. You know, this data. We look at all infrastructure projects in the world and look at their biodiversity impact and look at, you know, what are the conflicts between the things we are doing in the side of renewables. They all are using land, and we need to think about where do we put these renewables. So they are going to be necessary, but we have to be aware that there are some conflicts about land use and so on. So it's all there now, and we just have to apply it.
Can it be applied at the speed that's needed?
Well, that's I think it's really up to us. I mean, I think Martin described the urgency of this, and you know, we are a new institution. We have a chance to build this into our DNA, to put this at the very core of what we are doing. My president speaks about this now in every speech that he makes, basically, and says, you know, nature as infrastructure. We need to think about it, and it's, you know, if we don't take it on, you know, we won't win this battle.
Well, let's get to other experiences. Let's go to Egypt. Welcome to Rania Mashad. Welcome. You are the Minister for International Cooperation of the government. When you listen to this, and given your other responsibilities, and think about what happened at COP27, literally just over a year ago from this Davos, what's your experience and what's your impression of how much nature is being abused in your country and your region?
I mean, many thoughts come to mind. Let me, maybe highlight one of the outcomes of COP27, which was the Loss and Damage Fund. And when we talk about deforestation, when we talk about land which is being, you know, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, basically disappearing because of droughts and what's happening with pollution and so forth. This is again translating an economic cost around what we lose from nature. And I want to go back to you know, when gender issues came up and women empowerment became an economic phenomena, that everybody wants to close the gender gap because it has economic outcomes and dividends, it becomes then streamlined in what public policy does, what private sector tries to do. I think our discussion on nature is going in that direction. You mentioned that there's the nature and biodiversity track, which is separate. There's a special COP for it, and I think one of the key debates was they should be together, because if we're talking about the energy transition and we're talking about adaptation, nature is the cradle of all of that, and it does have economic implications if we don't protect it. So I'm thinking here of not just the investment opportunity to try and replenish nature, but also the dividend that we all get by making sure that we protect it. And this is very, very important in the narrative around nature. You asked about citizens. And I think that there's a breakthrough in the way citizens look at climate today compared to before COP26. COP26
created... Do you think they realize the abuse of nature that's going on?
I think we're getting there, and that's why I wanted to draw the parallel with what happened at COP26. I think a very important shift happened in how all of us, private sector, governments, philanthropy, NGOs, scientists, everybody has a part to play in the climate discussion. I think this is what's happening now on the nature front as well.
But if they realize the scale of the problem, how sinister potentially this is, given the kind of details that we've heard from Martin.
The scale and the economic cost that it implies. If you are in a country that relies on tourism, when your coral reefs disappear, you're going to lose so many jobs, and the economy is going to suffer by so much. Let alone, of course, the amount of money you need to invest to try and bring it back up, and maybe it comes or doesn't, because sometimes you're completely foregone and you cannot replenish some of the natural endowments. So my conclusion here is this requires the awareness which is taking place, maybe not at the pace that it should. We need to try and quantify when we are losing nature, how much that is becoming an economic loss on a national scale, but also at a global scale. Number three, there needs to be policy from the government side that tries to protect this, and then the collaboration with other institutions, be it multilateral development institutions and so on. And there are many ideas when it comes to the investment part, because in order to replenish, you need money. And when we're talking about cost of finance being so high today, and when you have competing priorities, then how can we create innovative financing tools to make sure that we are able to replenish or at least invest in nature to protect it from further deterioration?
Well, we'll move on to that in the second part of this. Could I just check? We've got microphones here for some of our guests because we want to hear other examples. But Eric, you wanted to come in particularly on what you just heard.
Yeah, no, I think,
Rania.
as always, Rania found a fantastic metaphor or parallel. I was at the EBRD when we...
European Bank for Reconstruction and Development.
Yes, exactly, sorry. And when we were asked to go into North Africa, actually, when we got to know each other, and, we had not emphasized the gender aspect at all. But what we faced, first in Turkey and then in North Africa and the Middle East, was 80% of women were outside the labor force, the official labor force. When we redefined this to say, this is about incredibly inefficient to have all these women outside, often very well educated and so on. That changed the whole way our institution worked. And this woman, the first woman that I hired to run this, she today has 50 people looking for opportunities to increase efficiency of projects. That's how we have to think about nature now. It's a very good allegory.
Well, let's get some experiences from Turkey for a start.
Hello, I am from Turkey, Istanbul. I'm a global shaper from the Istanbul Hub. I'm representing Turkey here as a global shaper, as a young leader, working on climate change.
Would you like to repeat that? Apologies to everyone online that you didn't hear that. Start again, please.
Hello, I'm a global shaper from Istanbul, Turkey, representing the youth community of Turkey, Istanbul, and I'm working on climate projects in my hub. Sorry for my voice.
The microphone makes it better.
Yeah.
It's a Davos voice.
Yes, it is. So when we are talking about climate, about the price of nature, we usually talk about infrastructure, emission credits, usually the E part of ESG. However, climate change, as you said, is highly intersectional with the social part as well, and it also has social costs. My question is, we see a lot of extreme heat and air pollution affecting workforce productivity, causing a lot of deaths, and also causing a lot of social injustice. How are banks and insurers thinking about the social cuts of the climate change?
But before you ask a question to us, let me ask a question to you. How much do you think within Turkey people understand the abuse of nature and the fact that they've really got to change the way they do things?
Great question. I do not think that they understand it quite well. Usually we think about it in waste and trash, but we do not really link how the climate and how the weather we are experiencing is changing due to climate change, and how it is actually having economical implications instead of, for example, in agriculture. Currently, we are having some of the agriculture crops that we used to have. Farmers are having a lot of trouble economically. So climate change has a lot of implications in various industries, and it's not well
nature
understood.
particularly, not just climate change, it's nature, the very heart of everything that we take for granted, as Martin has made clear. João, from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. You have a new government.
We do.
For the last 15 months, has it made a difference when it comes to understanding nature and the real impact on nature, not just in the forests, but overall in terms of public perception?
Perfect. So when we start to understanding that nature, and for sure, in Brazil we have Amazon forest, as you know, that cross all the countries in Latin America. We started to see that, as our environmental minister said yesterday in a panel, that 70% of the economic of the South America passed through Amazon somehow. So when this new government shows up and bring
They
this
didn't just
attention,
show up, they were voted
they was
in.
voters, yeah, for sure. Sorry,
They didn't just
But
sort of turn
there
up
was-
one day.
they returned, and then it started to realize and put as a cross-sectoral main topic for all ministers, and all strategic plans need to deal with nature and climate change as a transversal topic. I think that it started to change the mindset of the population.
It's
as
had
well.
impact.
It's had an impact. Amazon already had a reduction of deforestation in more than 50% between 2022 and 2023. So I think it's doing great. We still have a lot to advance, because we have other biomes in Brazil that need to be tackled as well. But as the world knows, Amazon forest, and this is the priority for everyone. So this is going on.
But when you heard Martin, when you heard the minister, when you heard the economist as well saying what they did, do you think that that's the kind of thing that's going to resonate with political backing in a place like Rio, where you've had such a change, particularly from your president?
I think that is still a challenge. Population do not understand really well which loss we are getting from like biodiversity. People still need to connect how food are impacted and how our health are impacted by biodiversity loss that we already have in Brazil and around the world. So yeah, I think that's still going on, but we have a lot to develop.
Let's just move the microphone along if we can, to Anne-Adeline Dumayon from the Philippines. Your microphone should work.
It should work,
It
yeah.
does.
Oh, wow.
But again, picking up on nature and with the impact that nature is understood to be having in the Philippines, and what government authorities particularly are doing in order to make people realize this is a profound threat to their
Right.
way of life.
Yeah. So for those who do not know, the Philippines is clearly one of the most at-risk countries for the climate crisis. It's also one of our mega diverse countries of the world. And that's a heritage for all of us to take care of. In the Philippines, there is a growing understanding of how typhoons and flooding risks increase when you do not take care of your natural ecosystems. In my project, which takes care of the Upper Marikina watershed, which flows down to the capital of Metro Manila, a World Bank study, and it's a pivotal study, actually shows that the siltation control capability of this area is equivalent to 10,500 dams. And the dam isn't cheap. A dam isn't cheap. A small impounding dam costs as much as $10,000 US. So with these metrics in place, then it becomes much clearer what exactly it is that we stand to lose when we do not take care of nature. So it's wonderful that we have banks, insurance, companies bring all of these information out and lend the economic aspect of these things that help us understand things much faster. Now, the problem really is that I found this study given to me by a person who raised that it's not being used in decision making. And it's not making, the information isn't making its way out to the public, right? That's how it ended up with us. So we do need policymakers, executives to actually have the will to implement what all of these studies and all of these metrics.
Policymakers to have the will and the determination. Martin, pick up on this tension between political reality and the nature, the horror of what is coming down the track.
Look, I think we have a choice. We have to solve a social problem, and we have to solve this overwhelming nature problem. And currently it seems that we are not using it, or we are not trying to solve these problems both at the same time. And it could be easier to solve both at the same time. First, the starting point, and you alluded to that earlier, either we don't know or we can't accept the consequence. We don't know. Sometimes on the internet you see these cartoons. There's this cartoon where there's a first wave coming, which is the financial crisis, second wave coming, which is the COVID crisis, the third wave coming is the climate crisis, and the fourth big wave coming is the biodiversity and nature crisis. Not everyone is aware of that, and even if we are aware of that, then we are caught in in our traps. On the way to Davos, I was passing a convoy of about 500 tractors. German farmers are demonstrating. And I wonder, where does this bitterness come from? Or where does the bitterness come from African countries who are actually saying, we own and we steward, we are the custodians of major parts of the remaining biodiversity hotspots on the planet, but you don't pay us anything for that. That breeds bitterness. But and if we start taking care of nature, then we often do it in a patronizing way that actually leaves those who are most exposed to nature even poorer than before. Because we should never forget, we have not only do we have income inequality, we also have climate inequality, which is even bigger, and we have nature inequality, which is even bigger. Sort of poor people contributed less to the problem and are more penalized by the consequences than even in the realm of social and finance, in the realm of climate. So that we need to be aware of. Yesterday night, something of the most meaningful things have been said when we were at a nature dinner, and that was the Minister of the Environment of Colombia, Minister Mohamed, and she actually said, we wanted to host COP16, which is this biodiversity summit, because we think this is something, our experience can be a gift to the world. We have been a torn country with internal struggles and civil war, but then we went through a process of reconciliation, and when the parties sat together, and then some of the victims of that strife, when they were talking to the former perpetrators, and it was asked, how can we reconciliate? How can we make peace again? How can we come back together? In fact, they said, those victims said, help us restore our nature.
Well, let's go to Colombia, because we actually have someone from there, Alfonso Escolar Gonzalez. You have a microphone, I hope?
Yes.
Good, okay. But just pick up on what Martin has been saying, because you are from Colombia, and we were talking beforehand about the kind of internal political pressures, particularly after the FARC, the guerrilla organization, and the kind of shredding of political consensus. If it has become a danger.
Yes, it is. I think the link between peace, security, and nature in Colombia is the perfect example to see the direct relation. After, as you mentioned, the peace agreement, we thought that it was going to be something beneficial for the environment, but we saw a spike on deforestation on 2017, and that has been gradually coming down, but it's still far from reaching net zero as one of the targets for 2030.
So we're talking about political realities getting in the way of what we've just heard from Martin.
Absolutely.
But let me add one more thought. I think the way in which we can reconciliate and heal is by starting to reward. And by the way, there's my favorite example of that is in Egypt. It's SECAM. We need to.
What is SECAM?
SECAM is you might be best positioned to talk to that. Sort of, it's basically a scheme where thousands and thousands of farmers are first of all brought into dignified farming work and are able to sell their products, but in such a way that it actually also delivers ecosystem services and heals the planet. I think the big challenge that we have, and it's also an opportunity, I was invited here because my latest company after Systemic that I built is a so-called nature fintech, which is a new thing, which has no other ambition than to allow every land steward on the planet to be rewarded for the delivery of ecosystem services, and allow every company on earth, from the food companies, the banks, the payment services, whoever, actually to make balance sheet grade investments into nature capital, and so create a completely new handshake between those billions and billions who are safeguarding what keeps us as a civilization alive, which is nature. And today we don't do that, and in the future we have to. And whilst we need to find ways of how to and agree on ways where that finance comes from, how we are rewarding that, I think the first thing that we need to do is to build the infrastructure that allows us actually to have a trusting, equitable new relationship and handshake between all those who depend on nature and those who are stewarding nature.
So, Minister, you have to leave it shortly, but SECAM, and take forward the principles of what you've been hearing here, particularly from the developing world and the kind of the continent you come from.
A few points. Who are those who are fastly deteriorating nature? It's usually the investments, the over-investments. So it's, again, the capital that's making its way or trying to capitalize. And those who bear the cost are all citizens, of course, but also those who are more vulnerable. And that's where the farming example comes in, and many other when it comes even to regional disparities among countries. So that's one very important aspect. The second is when we talk about financing, and now in the rhetoric around the COP and so forth, there are now debt swaps for nature. As a way to maybe create space, fiscal space for countries to be able to do that investment in nature at a cost which is conducive and helpful. So we are seeing there these innovative financing arrangements for helping, but they are very small in scale and they may not deliver with the pace and speed of the deterioration that's taking place. SICAM is an example of, again, it's private and it has to do with empowering farmers with modern farming techniques, but again, that are very much mindful to nature. So this is happening in Egypt through a company in different rural areas. Something we are discussing with IFAD and others is creating something like a carbon, we have carbon credits, now we can talk about resilience credits. And resilience credits have to do with nature, have to do with adaptation, so that's water, agriculture, and again, everything that revolves around them. So we have a working group where we're trying to see how we can monetize these investments or these assets so that we protect them. Nick, to answer you bluntly, we are not as fast as we should. We are not as fast as we should when it comes to policymakers, private sector, etc. I think that the discussion has been for a while, but it's picking up speed now or getting louder. And I go back to when, a few years ago, maybe 2020, when we were here in Davos, and there was climate, and there were only protests. So people did not really engage much. It just seemed like, a pocket of people against what's happening with respect to the big corporates. Now it's more entrenched in policy. It's more entrenched in what private sector wants to do. The objectives of net zero are more widespread, and everybody's working together to try at least as fast as possible achieve them. We need something similar to that in nature. We need a bigger awakening. We need more discussions. We need you to speak more. We need to try and quantify the economic cost, and we need to define policies that, again, and let me do the parallel the same way I did with the gender. When we say that you want countries to do their green transition fast, we always have this conflict between climate and development. I think the narrative out of COP28 and COP27 put the socio-economic implications of climate and the just transition. We need something similar in nature.
Just before you leave, you've just been through a presidential election, major election. In other words, there's a new stability. Did nature get onto the agenda at all during that election?
Well, there are many other things on the agenda which are challenging as well. But I think what is important, the Red Sea is very important for Egypt. Coral reefs in the Red Sea are extremely important. And we have several initiatives that also came out of COP. The Red Sea Initiative, which we are doing with UNDP, as well as some of the development partners. So our work in protected areas in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Sinai, the Red Sea, other areas has been going on for several years. So there is that, and by the way, those who are in the implementation are the NGOs. Therefore, they are the communities themselves that are there and being affected and try to find the solutions, because solutions also have to be driven from within. Because it's a long term. It's not just a wind plant or a solar panel that you're going to install. I think with nature, it's more time. It's a change in the way you're going to be reacting with nature itself. So all I'm trying to say is, in our case, there is awareness. It needs more, and we need more emphasis on how to create that trade-off between the overinvestment in some of the areas that we need in order to increase economic activity, but at the same time, the cost is quite high because there's an implication on nature.
Rania, thank you very much indeed. Let's do a hot switch. You have to leave, and I'm going to introduce Tim Murphy from MasterCard. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Tim Murphy is joining us, who is Chief Administration or Administrative Officer,
whichever you choose,
for MasterCard, depending on which language we're using. Martin, if you could, are you able to stay?
I also need to move on, which is a pity because I
But
agree.
can you just react to what Tim is going to say?
well, we'll talk later.
Can you react at all to what Tim is about to say? Particularly, Tim, on one of your important coalitions, the Priceless Planet Coalition.
Yeah.
Explain what it is, and then we can get a quick reaction from Martin before he leaves.
Sure, I'll be very brief. So MasterCard is one of the networks that powers the modern digital economy. We have 3 billion cardholders around the world, where cards are accepted at 110 million merchant locations. And we sit on vast amounts of anonymized private data that we can use for policymakers to help them make good decisions. We think the contribution we can make to the climate crisis is enabling that 3 billion cardholder base, a vast number of people around the world, to understand these issues, to be engaged in them, and to, frankly, to make better decisions. There's a lot we can talk about on that, but where we've started is with what we call the Priceless Planet Coalition. It's a coalition of 150 merchants, governments, cities, financial institutions that is committed to reforestation 100 million trees by 2025. We're well on our way. We've raised $52 million. We've got 19 projects through 2 very high quality agencies who are doing the work on the ground in conjunction with local communities. And it's simply an effort to do something relevant on this topic. I will say it is largely focused on climate change. And this idea that you've raised so clearly, and I really want to emphasize, I think the minister's last point was essential. We need a dialogue that now moves beyond just temperature and climate change to biodiversity and to the wider horrors, I think, that you've talked about. But this is designed not just to do the work, but to enable consumers to be engaged in the work. And so what our financial institution partners do is they will plant a tree if you take a climate-friendly action. We can embed these into consumer loyalty programs around the world. It's a way of getting consumers to, as they consume, to do something good for
So
them.
Martin, to just pick up on this, the fact that a major global corporate is taking this action, providing real heft to the message, is that going to help at least stabilize the problem as opposed to maybe minimizing it or reducing it in the way that you feel is needed?
In this case, it's more than that, because here's a company that actually brings a central capability that we need to build this future infrastructure in which we can account for nature. I think something has changed, and it's happening in front of our eyes, and and this conversation is part of it. We came from a world where no one knew and no one cared. Now we move into a world where people know and they care. And I think for the first time there's even more demand for reinvesting into nature restoration and preservation than we as a community are able to deliver, because currently we haven't found a way to do that. Do we do that through a REDD+ carbon credit? And people say, no, this is a very limited concept. Do we do that by buying land? No, we can't buy Africa. There are sort of political acceptability thresholds that we should never sort of, and it wouldn't be capital efficient. Can we sort of, how do we actually do that? And I think there is a world in which people are prepared actually to make this new contract with all those who take land stewardship decisions, sort of the land stewards, which is probably 1 billion people, and and then when they get delivered proven, verifiable nature improvement, nature preservation, that actually turns into an asset that you want to own, because it's a good currency to have. It helps you to have a better conversation with your shareholders, because you can show my value chain is safe. It has to have a better conversation with your governments, with your ESG rating agencies, even potentially with secondary markets. I mean, this is how currency came to life. We as society have decided they are of value. These are just fictions. So, but every time it requires requires sort of a line of custody where we are able to go all the way from assessing nature, biodiversity, water, carbon, soil, to turn it into a contract, to turn it into an asset and be able to transact it. And it's evident that sort of your world, let's just dream a bit, in 5 years' time when we meet again here, every one of your customers has a natural capital account. Yeah? And every one of your customer is sort of is able to to know sort of what's my overall net nature balance and how much do I have to invest in direct and indirect ways in order sort of to be part of that nature positive journey. And I think there is a community of very competent technology, scientific and financial organizations that jointly have the competence to build that infrastructure.
Yes. Can I react to one thing? And we still perceive a real gap between what people say and what they actually do as it relates to their consumption decisions. And I think that's getting very much at, I think, what you're saying. Part of that reason is not because people are lying to us. Part of it is because there's transaction costs to actually do the right thing. And I think the kind of platform where innovation is deeply required in the space of engaging with the world's consumers on how to make this fun, interesting, optimistic. It needs to point people towards a positive future. And so there's an element of future work around consumer platforms, consumer experiences that make it easy and exciting and the right thing to do. That's where we can help. We rely on experts to plant trees. That is not what we do, but we engage with consumers around the world every day. That's why this is exciting work.
What is the status of the data, again, before Martin leaves? Is it something which is commercially sensitive to you and you keep it, or do you share it?
So, look, the data that we sit on, we use for all sorts of commercial purposes.
But given what Martin has said, is this data that can be shared publicly?
It can. We have strong data for good practices, so we'll work with governments to make better policy decisions. But I look at this as an opportunity for commercial gain. If we can find ways to have consumers engaged on these issues and that see us as a partner, we can win in the marketplace as well. So we'll do both. We'll both share, but we'll also compete.
Martin, any final word before you leave?
Look, I think this is there's a huge opportunity that we are holding on our hands. That humanity is waking up to the challenge, and they're waking up to a challenge that is meaningful to them because few people don't have a deep connection to nature, and let's use that in the best of ways. Secondly, because there are a couple of political trends that are quite helpful. So there are some, essentially they're around making sure that there's transparency of what your nature footprint really is, and there's a very benign alphabet soup coming towards us with words like CSRD, CSDDD, TNFD. I don't want to get there. And whilst this is all very painful
we need
right
translation
now,
of all of that.
so these are rules that make sure that that everyone operates in daylight, because we live in a world where we need to know. And so again, whilst this is painful in the early days, like any new informational infrastructure, but later on it's what helps us to run our economy and our businesses, and later on. So, but there's something else that actually is happening in front of our eyes, which is for the first time we have the technology and the science that allows us to be discrete, to be concrete, what our nature capital stock really is. We can say it, but essentially, and that's sort of what we do, we try to give every pixel of the planet an ecological passport.
Wow. Every pixel.
And the ability to do that sort of has to do with the massive progress that we've seen even over the last 3 years when it comes to Earth observation, both in terms of temporal and spatial resolution, when it comes to so-called in situ data collection, metagenomics, bioacoustics, really wonderful technologies, or things like camera traps, tracking data, and deep learning models. So for the first time, we can build models that tell us what's happening on the ground in a way that is available, that is verifiable, auditable, and accessible, that even sort of major business processes that are so hyper-defined like yours can easily plug into. So you don't have to call the biologist to bring his binoculars and his Wellington boots and wait 9 months and then have a project which sort of you can't digest into your processes. So I think this is something that is a new opportunity that offers hope that wasn't available only some years ago.
Martin Struckte, thank you very much indeed. I know you have to leave. Thanks for being with us. Let's keep the debate going. Let's keep the debate going because I want to hear other sample experiences. Let's go to Nigeria, to Nyefamu. Welcome from Nyefamu Manzu. Tell us about your experience in Nigeria at the moment. How does it relate to the kind of real anxiety that we are hearing on the platform?
Thank you very much. My name is Nyefamu Manzo, and I'm from Nigeria. I'm a farmer, and I also work with smallholder farmers to connect them to markets using an agricultural technology platform. This is a very concerning issue for us because there are limited access to people understanding the actions that they have towards climate change, towards climate science, towards climate change. Like planting of trees, for instance, in 2022, in Kaduna State, Nigeria, we had the highest flooding issues, which was due to people cutting down trees, misuse of land management and soil. But one of the things that I'm so grateful for is that young people and also the government are now doing some community engagement in educating these people on the ripple effect of their actions. So for as simple as disposal of our plastic waste, properly disposing them well in Nigeria, it can now affect like the flooding. One of the perfect example I will share is some shepherds in Nigeria. Joy Ajuluchukwu, for instance, she single-handedly planted over 1,000 trees in Kaduna State, which had a very, very positive impact on making people understand that we don't need to cut down trees anymore to cook food because we use them in firewood in Nigeria. We also have another shepherd, Kamaldeen, who has Inata Energy, who is working on biofuel, using agricultural waste to create fuel for people to make food, which are also affordable. So there have been some grassroots engagement in understanding the ripple effect on climate.
Grassroots, is that you saying it's limited and quite elementary at the moment? It's not as decisive as it should be.
Yes, people have not been able to understand better, but there have still been some grassroots engagement. So in lower communities, in low-income communities, people have been going there to teach them to better understand the things that they do to affect the climate.
All right. Do we have Marie-Claire Graf here? Please, Marie-Claire, do you have your microphone? Do you have a microphone?
I
Good.
think it works, right?
All
Yes.
right. You happen to come from Switzerland, but you actually have a much broader perspective. But there's one particular thing about your qualification and why you're here, because you said you were born at a time when atmosphere CO2 was at 364.92 ppm. What was the point you were making?
That back then it was still in a range, and we talk about the planetary boundaries, and it was still in a safe space for us as humanity to live on the planet, but also for nature to actually recover. And as you alluded to in the beginning, we left this threshold a couple of years ago, and now we are in a very dangerous space where we actually don't know what is happening to us as well as to all the other beings on this planet. Also, for example, the mountains and the glaciers we are surrounded by.
What's your understanding of the ppm now?
Like
Well, it was 364, but
it's like 420 something
yes,
now.
It's massive.
Yes.
What's your particular point about nature here? About the we are in a well-developed country here in Switzerland. Do you think there's an understanding of the enormity of the challenge? And I made this reference right at the beginning. Wonderful mountains, wonderful outside life, but actually there's a sinister message coming through, which is things are no longer anything like they used to be.
Absolutely, and we still have people in Switzerland who are saying we don't see the degradation of nature, whereas you could actually come to these mountains and you see how the mountains are literally crumbling apart because the permafrost is no longer holding them together. You can see how the glaciers are declining like on a rapid speed. The best researched glacier in the world is actually not too far from here. It's the Morteratsch Glacier. Since 1850, they are measuring the glacier every single minute, and you can literally see how it's just melting away in front of your eyes. You can actually walk up. There are information sheets. You can stand where you were born and you can look at the glacier and you're going to cry. I'm crying every single time when I'm going there. Still, we have people here who are saying we don't really see the impacts yet. We are not really suffering from the consequence. Well, these people on the islands and somewhere in Africa might feel it, and it's a really ignorant statement because very often these people are sitting in decision-making powers. And I just wanted to pick up on one thing which was mentioned before. We have the data. We have everything what we need. The science is very, very clear. The latest assessment report from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says it's once again very, very clearly. But what we're lacking is the will and the courage to actually do, because that's where it's getting uncomfortable. It's that we have to speak up, where we have to get out of our comfort zone, and where we have to challenge our friends. and no longer just kind of like, operating the business as usual modernity. And that's very, very critical, that people who are gathering here in Davos are getting to this uncomfortable space, because otherwise there is very, very little hope left.
Tim, how does what you're doing potentially add to that data mountain and also act as a catalyst for political and commercial decision making?
Look, here's how I would respond to that. I think I find myself in agreement with everything you've said. I think the reality is, again, I'll go back to the minister's earlier comment. I do think there has been an enormous amount of movement in the last few years, certainly in the corporate sector, around responsibility for climate change. And you've seen company after company make net zero commitments and make real investments, some of which we don't know how to actually implement. Most companies still are working through how to address their scope 3 emissions.
But many have never even realized the impact they've had on nature, what happens outside the factory door.
I think that's true, but there's more trying to do good work than there's been before. My point is on the biodiversity issue and on the complexity of nature issue. That is not being talked about at corporate boardrooms in the same way that climate change has been. And I think one of the outcomes from this conversation needs to be putting that on the agenda as well. Because if we can do the same thing, we may not be moving fast enough, the urgency is real, we can at least move institutions forward. The other thing I will say is we have to look for leadership around the world. It's so essential that these young people are here and doing their work. There are some places like the United States where the politics of this are very difficult
and
increasingly difficult, and they make it very difficult for corporations to do the work. But Europe must lead, and Africa must lead, and Latin America must continue to lead because that's just the reality.
Are you saying that even though people go hiking in the United States, love the outdoor life, they don't really understand the impact on nature? But I'm not going to ask the political question.
No, so I won't answer the political question.
That's why I'm not going to ask.
Because I'm well media trained by my colleagues. But I will answer your question. I was dying to... People wake up every morning and the birds still sing and the snow is still on the mountain. And I think most people do not understand these impacts.
Okay, right. Who's got the microphone? Go ahead.
Go for it. I was going to say there isn't a lot of snow on the glaciers anymore, and it's highly ironic that Swiss up-and-coming snowboarders and skiers have to fly to Japan or New Zealand in the summer, whereas they would have skied on the glaciers previously. And I think with all due respect to MasterCard, we're scratching the surface here, and all of us as consumers are part of the problem,
I did say that
and
right,
also absolutely right, but also not part of the solution potentially. But it's only when corporates, major corporates, who are responsible for devastating the natural environment, actually abide to a certain global regulatory landscape, and when ecocide is made, comes into practice, just like genocide, that actual meaningful change will happen here.
All right, thank you. Please.
Very shortly, I will give you the best example of the abuse of nature in the last 5 years. I'm Dr. Nicoleta Catrini. I'm working in impact investing. I'm originally from Romania. 5 years ago, a couple of scientists was watching on some pictures taken from a satellite, and they saw that Carpathian Mountains in the north of Romania were completely empty, completely empty. Thousands of square meters empty. What happened is that wood was stolen during the nights. Dozens of thousands of trucks full of wood stolen from Romania went then into Western rich corporate who were doing furniture that we buy for, I even here in Switzerland found for 3 Swiss francs nothing. So I understand that you put the weight on the consumer's choices, but I think consumer is the last element in this, and I don't think his limits are really, the choice is very large because we acknowledge an impoverishment of the world population. So looking for the lowest price, I don't think it's, you can judge the consumer for that. I really think that everything it's about major corporations, and in the end it's about greed, because I am an economist. I understand you have to have a sustainable business model, but when you stole or so much wood to sell a product for. This is unacceptable, and this is here where I think we should have mechanisms to punish that. That means really heavily for them to internalize the cost of their activity, because if their price is so tiny, it's because these negative externalities are never internalized. So they are not competitive. In fact, it's a fake competitive advantage they have, supposing they're efficient. No, they are not efficient. They just don't pay for the costs they make. Thank you so much.
Eric, the economist, is going to answer that, but I'd like to invite in, if I can, Gretchen. Are you here? You've just arrived from Stanford. From Stanford University. I'd like you to come and join us up here if you could. If you can just prepare yourself. We've obviously been having a long debate, but given your work at Stanford and the kind of position you've taken with your work, I know you're late into the discussion, but you can add a little bit of weight and insight to the kind of things we're talking about. So do come and join us on the panel. Eric, just reflect on what you've just heard.
So it's ultimately, of course, about what we talked about earlier, valuing nature, valuing the contributions that individuals are making to nature. I just want to give an example that I think shows what this is about and picks up what you said about Nigeria and so on. So in this report, we look at one of the oldest nature as infrastructure project, which is a tree planting project in the north of China, the Sunbei project. It was about preventing two deserts from merging. It started in '78. It was a very poorly conceived, planting trees that only one type of tree. I mean, you're familiar with this. Took a lot of water and so on. But what really happened over time is that this project evolved. It evolved because the local community saw that it wasn't working, and scientists started to see that we need to think differently. And it was that interaction between the local communities and trying different things, learning by doing, and having that data that come from the scientists, bringing that together. And today we can show that it has not only prevented those deserts from merging, but also prevented a lot of sandstorms and so on. So I think that connecting science, local communities are part of the ecosystem. They need to be incentivized to really use this.
Can I jump on? Just to make a comment on
from
that.
From Brazilian perspective.
From Brazil, yeah. I think that we have a social aspect that I want to bring on this discussion, because how in all those discussions of climate and how we can save ourselves, we don't leave no one behind. We are talking that nature, it's an infrastructure, so local community probably that lives inside nature is the main workers that need to be there. So, and one aspect that I want to mention, it's about finance. It's how we also get funding for low-income communities and also grassroots movements, as my friend said. Because what we have been seeing is that we have big corporations, we have big companies that can also help us to plant our trees. But at the daily basis, we are the one that can feed with water that trees and help them to keep alive. And also we will be the one that we will get results from that. So how we can transform this finance system that and also get more funding to do the work in the grassroots, in the local places. And I can give you an example. We had a project, and we have a project in the Global Shapers in Rio that we received $10,000 funding just to implement community gardens in low-income communities, and we impact more than 100 kids and families, producing food and also giving a safe space for the water that always have floods. There is a safe and natural space that the water can go and not go more to people's house. So it's too little with a huge impact that we can make. How we can make it bigger, how we can make it like spread around. As you said, it's still small, but we can. I think that we can do more if we have the right perspective and access for the funding.
In fact, well, let me just come back to you from Nigeria. Given what you were saying, too little being done at a local level, are we seeing the potential, particularly from women, to push this in a direction which is in the right direction, upwards, to put pressure on those at the top to do things differently?
I will come from the angle of agriculture, because like I said, I'm a farmer. So I work with women in agriculture who are very resilient women, and their voices are not as heard as the men counterparts, which is very disheartening. And a couple of times we reach out to the government. Not a lot of solution has been provided yet. However, we are very positive that if we keep putting our voice out there, we have the women being heard, understanding that they have a key role in playing in climate action.
All right, now Gretchen has joined us. I'll do my best to introduce you. You very kindly come to join us for the last 15 minutes from another session. You are running your Natural Capital Project at Stanford University on the west coast of America. But if you can pick up the threads, we've established very clearly just how serious all of this is. We have representatives from many different areas here talking about how challenging this has become, how much lack of awareness is. We've heard from MasterCard as well with their big projects that this is now about creating a new capacity to generate a multiplier for addressing nature. Can you just try and parachute in to where we've got to and give us a sense of how desperate this is, how acutely desperate this is, and the speed at which stuff has got to be done. Martin was sitting there a moment ago before you came in.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay
Yes,
like
we
this?
can, yeah.
I really appreciate the range of comments that I heard on entering, and I feel that what a bit more that I heard here indicates how, first of all, how many success stories there are on the ground, even with $10,000 to implement these community gardens, or the work in China that started decades ago that we all can learn from, that has universal relevance, even though there are a lot of particulars, the Chinese characteristics, so to speak. And in my work in this area over the past 25 years or so, I've seen massive uptake of these kinds of approaches, but all at very small scale. And it seems there is a huge challenge now to try to bring these into greater force and drive the policy changes needed to internalize these externalities and so on. But I'd say I feel hopeful for a few reasons, just to put some hope out here. I'm an ecologist.
But what you're saying is the message is understood now about nature.
The message is understood increasingly in some spaces. And I think it's sort of like what Gimhui Neo said yesterday. I don't know if you were in that session, that it's a little bit like looking for the acupressure spots on the system, and the people who can apply pressure in those places that could then really take us to the next level. There have been, among the public sector institutions, the multilateral development banks like AIIB, but some of the others with whom we've worked closely, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and others, have agreed to and pledged to go nature positive, by 2025, which is really coming up. And there are many change makers with their hands on those pressure points within those banks. But we need a lot. There's a huge capacity gap. And there are very few people who know how to do this kind of work, go and engage in communities in an appropriate way. And ultimately it's people in communities whose hands need to do the restoration and the revitalization. But there are also people at the top. Yeah.
Let's
really
pick up.
keen
We've got several representatives of communities around the world, particularly indigenous communities. But just before we go there, Gretchen, one of the things we've been discussing is data. And when you say going nature positive by 2025, did you say? The question is, how will they know if they're nature positive? They can say, I'm nature positive, but how do we prove that they are?
Yeah, one big aim of the Natural Capital Project which is a global partnership of about 500 partner institutions. It's to provide data to allow for that monitoring, verification, and reporting. There's still a ways to go on the actual systems that would help implement that, but we have on our platform global environmental data, and we're bringing in ever more social and economic data and health-related data. And
Is
that
there
kind of
enough?
thing.
Is there enough data?
There's enough to measure progress in, that's not the main barrier. I think the main barrier in many cases is still capacity, and we're trying to design a technical assistance center that would accelerate adoption and capacity development in communities and in countries, so that this knowledge and access isn't, is just made much more widely available. And that would launch with the Global Environment Facility and a suite of supporting institutions to mainly open up access to all of this. We have the modeling and tools in Spanish and in Chinese now, and are aiming to translate into many other languages.
And
but-
English.
And it's in English, yes. And the uptake is in all countries. So there's some action, but a huge gap in.
So, Tim, where does your Priceless Planet Coalition fit into this?
Look-
you have to look at it commercially.
Yeah.
We're hearing from a leading global project at a university. Where do you fit in?
I think for private sector companies that are engaged on these issues, what we need to do is take the work that we do today, which is frankly just the beginning, but it is an authentic commitment with resources to drive change, and make sure we're attuned to the new evolution, the new data that you're bringing in, and find additional partners and additional places we can put our resources to make a positive change. And I'll come back and say again, the corporate community still remains largely focused on climate change and emissions issues. That's essential. The work needs to continue. Today's conversation is about nature and biodiversity. That needs to come on the agenda as well. With the right kind of reporting frameworks and the right kind of accountability from shareholders, policymakers, and others, I think the private sector can make a positive contribution. And just to react to some of the comments again, the value, I really can't help on many of these pieces, but what I can help is engage the 3 billion cardholders that sit on our network around the world to get excited, to understand the issues, to view this as part of how they think about spending their assets and resources. And that's where we can add the highest value, so that's the work we will do.
Am I deluded to ask this question that when I present my MasterCard, if I have one,
Yes.
I'm not showing any partiality here, that a flag could come up and say, do you really want to buy this? Do you realize?
so-
well, let me finish.
Yeah.
Do you realize the impact on nature? Do you realize the downsides and the carbon? Are we moving in that direction?
We are. So in addition to what I talked about today, which was the reforestation, the Priceless Coalition, we and others are doing quite a bit of work in embedding carbon calculation and other measurements in real time into the flow, so that you can show a consumer the carbon impact of the consumption decisions that they're making. Right now, they're good but not great. They tend to be after the fact. They're not as granular as we'd like them to be. And consumer uptake is, we've got some work to do. But I think you give us a couple more years working on those issues, and you'll see much more upfront analysis, so a transaction or sort of a view before you spend. We'll see options to ameliorate or to mitigate costs built right into the payment experience. If we get 3 billion people even starting to change their behaviors in some ways in that direction, particularly if I can make it a competitive advantage because people want to work with me because I do it better than the other guy, I think we're making a positive contribution. Biodiversity needs to be on the agenda.
That's even though maybe the purchase doesn't go through because people say, maybe I shouldn't buy this.
So this is the
Therefore, you
debate.
don't make your percentage.
So there's a whole look. People buy goods. People also buy services. You can buy a car. You can sit in one of the very expensive black Mercedes here, or you can use a MasterCard for very environmentally sustainable tram and urban mobility. So there's all sorts of if consumption is about reducing standards of living, that's not the answer, and it's not going to happen. So the choice is how do we make better decisions, and there's all sorts of space to make good progress.
Right, Tim. Right, we're getting towards the end. We've got about 6 minutes left. I'd like to hear from each of those of you who come from other countries, like from Colombia. Alfonso, what's your reflection on what you've been hearing here about whether this can be translated to the ground level in your country, which still has got the legacy of a guerrilla war?
No, absolutely, and I really think that bringing up biodiversity into agenda is a very key topic.
Yeah.
And for example, yeah, maybe you won't buy something with a MasterCard, but you will buy some acai powder that comes from indigenous communities from the Amazon, from an agroforestry project, or that was wildly harvested, and that is helping sustainable livelihoods. And why is biodiversity so important? Because we think nature only as a pit of losing money, so they are just investing on restoration, but also it's a way to be able to generate prosperity and profits. And the term bioeconomy is on the agenda, is the possibility of, through innovation, the ancestral and traditional knowledge of communities come with products that will be game changers on civilization. And one example I would like to bring is how the communities in indigenous communities in Colombia used a blue dye to use their traditional rituals. How with Western science they were able to turn it into the first organic blue dye in the world. And blue is one of the most difficult colors. And this is just one example of one single fruit, but Colombia has 26,000 species of plants and 6,000 of them still, yes.
Good, that's a relief.
And 6,000 of them have reported uses. So imagine a whole treasure of antibiotics, medicines, dyes, food that is there and that needs finance to go through.
And Emiliano from the Philippines, what's your reflection on what you've been hearing about whether this can be related to the kind of challenges you are seeing in your country?
We actually had this discussion yesterday with a few companies, and I think it's very important for us to realize that corporations, companies with the scale that you guys have, also are co-pilots in really resolving this climate crisis. Government is in charge of pursuing, enabling innovation faster through overcoming bureaucratic challenges, through policy, maybe not even policy, we need action now. And companies, on the other hand, can make nature a part of their vision and a part of their key objectives to fulfill. I don't think you fully recognize how much power it is that you hold when it comes to influencing policy, government, changing up systems. We can talk to activists like me, and yesterday I pointed out it's expensive to be an activist. It takes a toll on our lives. I have 7 harassment suits on me. My last death threat was 3 weeks ago. It's difficult. And if you could power up groups like us so that we could be better activists, so that our lives aren't endangered as we do these things, all the better. If you could harness your government relations arm, your PR agencies, towards a particular climate goal, my God, how quickly can we make a difference in countries like mine?
Well, let's
that
hope
have
that
these kinds of challenges.
this risk-free studio is safe for you. Ifamu from Nigeria, what are you taking away from this?
So just to add to what she said, I strongly believe in collaborations with key stakeholders. I would slightly disagree with what you said on capacity. There are people, especially young people, who have the capacity to create actions for climate and to protect the soil. So it's not like there are no capacities. However, there are no platforms for us to showcase ourselves. There are not enough funding, like he said, to also promote these works that we do. In Nigeria, a lot of young people are working with smallholder farmers on training them on good agricultural practices. Extension service holders are there. There are also over 100 NGOs that are working on climate issues. So these people are there, they have the capacity to build these things. However, they do not have a lot of collaborations and key stakeholders like you guys to empower us, just like she has said, and also he said, which is very important for growth and to scale up. So their capacities, however, not enough platform.
I gave a misimpression. I meant more in financing and support.
Okay.
Not so much in training, though there's some obviously technical skills that can always be improved anywhere, but I agree with you.
Irim from Turkey.
Hi. Well, I agree with Anne that we as activists and as citizens have actually a lot of power in influencing policy and regulation, and actually companies and their policies too. In my country, textile is a big industry, and currently in my hub we have a project where we empower artists and use art to influence behavior change in consumers, which we hope to, in the end, influence their behaviors in a way that they will have sustainable fashion behaviors adopted, which will in turn, in the end, influence the companies to change their direction into a more sustainable production way. So, but I really like the MasterCard idea about when you're purchasing something, you see this is the implications of the thing you're buying. This is the biodiversity loss it will cause. This is the emissions it will cause. It will give us agency as consumers. When we're buying something, we are aware and we know what we're causing. We could even offset our own emissions, or we could demand from companies to change. So that I think has a lot of potential.
Thank you very much for battling with your voice. Mary Claire, quickly.
Maybe very quickly, it might be quite controversial, but maybe it's like a thought for taking back home. That we walk a very narrow path when we want to quantify nature, because also some of our communities...
Why is it a narrow path?
I'm coming to it. Some of our communities, they don't only see nature as a resource, which we have been looking and exploiting, but also have a spiritual value, have the social value. There's so many values attributed which currently do not have any value. It's about the relation we have, and the relations we have with our family, our kids, our mothers and parents. They're priceless. And I think we walk a very, very tiny path, and I request you, who are walking this path and have the influence, be very, very careful that we are not going the rabbit hole down again, just not putting a price on it. Because there's so many values attributed to nature, and for me, the glaciers, they're priceless, but they're gone. Many of them are already dead. You can put the price on it, what it means for the ecosystem up here in Davos, and for many others, for whole Europe, the water reserve. But for me, the glacier, you cannot attribute any billions to it, because once it's gone forever. Thank you.
Finally, Tim, quickly if you can, please. What about the unbankable, the unbanked people? Vast numbers, millions, billions around the world, who simply don't have access. How will they fit into the efforts to actually impact favorably on nature? Quickly, if you can.
It's a huge untapped opportunity. Still 2.6 billion people don't have access to the internet. We've made big progress on financial inclusion, but there's billions who don't have access to the modern financial economy. I think we need to view financial inclusion and the intersection of climate change and biodiversity loss is another area that needs innovation. The more we can empower smallholder farmers across the world to both have access to the digital economy so they can sell their goods at a better price and invest and act in a way that it promotes biodiversity. We've already heard programs like that. This is another essential at scale. Again, you need consumers, the billions of consumers on one side, and the billions of people who are at the front lines, both engaged on these issues. And it's just beginning, but the intersection of those two, both the public sector and the private sector have to do more work on.
Final word, half a minute if you can, Eric. What are you taking away from this, given that as chief economist of the AIIB, you represent a bank in large numbers of countries?
First of all, I think what Gretchen is doing is incredibly important. You know, we need to bring these new tools across all the banks, and we have done it in climate. We have procedures for climate measuring, avoiding greenwashing. We have procedures for testing where it's Paris aligned. We need something similar for nature. But ultimately, what I take away, and I think anyone working in this space, is it's ultimately about people. And it's about the health impacts of this. It's about poor communities are much more affected, elderly are much more affected by this, and we need to connect to these groups and bring them in to the process, and of course ultimately understand that we are all part of these ecosystems, and if we are going to work together, everyone needs to be incentivized to be part of it.
Well, Eric, Tim and Gretchen and others who were sitting in your seats beforehand, thank you very much indeed, and all of you as well, for coming from different parts of the world. We set out at the beginning of this to account for nature, time to rebalance the equation. I'd like to put it to you that what we've helped do is at least rebalance the understanding and the appreciation of the enormity of what is facing us on nature and what has to be done and done at speed. From me, Nick Gowing, and also the Mariam Forum, thanks all of you for joining us, whether here or somewhere around the world. Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for your patience.
Thank you, Nick, and the Mariam Foundation for this compelling panel. Folks, don't go. Have another panel starting momentarily, so just allow us a minute or two transition.